Here.
Oh, yeah. Hello. So should I... Should I plan on a half hour, 40 minutes?
Half hour, 35 minutes,
Okay.
and then we'll open the door to question and answer. Okay. Hello, I'm Khale Sfandiari, the director of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Welcome to today's meeting on reality television and Arab politics, contention in public life. We are delighted to have back at the center Professor Marwan Kraidy, who teaches at the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. Marwan was a fellow at the Wilson Center in 2006, 2005? 2005, and he's quite popular with the Iranian intelligence ministry people who grilled me about one of his presentations at the Wilson Center, which was called Hezbollah's Information War Viewed from Lebanon. They just could not understand the tongue-in-cheek in the title, and no matter how much I tried to explain what Marwan meant, and on the contrary, it was complimentary how Hezbollah succeeded in a way in that war, but they said, no, just the word Hezbollah means that you were critical of them and so on. So Marwan Kraidy is a well-known name there.
Are they picking the lectures up from the internet, or do they have a plan?
Internet, because all our meetings are live webcast, and they are also on the internet. Professor Kraidy is a scholar of global communication and an expert on Arab media and politics. And he's the founding director of the Arab Media and Public Life, a project of the was at the American University. He was also a scholar in residence in the scholar program in culture and communication at Annenberg before joining the school. His books include Hybridity or the Cultural Logic of Globalization, 2005, Reality Television and Arab Politics, Contention in Public Life, which is Cambridge University Press, and Arab Television Industries, published by the British Film Institute and Palgrave Macmillan. Is it published or not yet? Yes, that's it. Okay. He has also authored two major commission reports, Arab Media and U.S. Policy, a Public Diplomacy Reset by the Stanley Foundation and Public Media in the Arab World, exploring the gap between reality and ideas. And then the Center for Social Media at Washington, D.C. He's a regular expert guest on U.S. public media programs like The News Hour with Jim Lehrer, On the Media, All Things Considered, NPR News, The Word, and Day to Day, and the Diane Rehm Show. We are delighted to have Marwan back. He's going to speak for 35 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions and comments. Marwan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Khale, for this kind introduction and for hosting me at a very crucial time in the writing of this book, when I was synthesizing and digesting an amount of data that looked unsurmountable at the time. The year at the center was the perfect time and place to do that. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the broad lessons of the book, so to speak, and read a few excerpts for you to get a sense of the primary sources, what Arab journalists have written about the phenomenon. But I wanted to start by saying that the book is really not about reality TV as much as it is about Arab politics, in the sense that I'm exploring a very a crucial and tense time in Arab politics from 2003 to 2008. As we know, it was a lot of things were going on then. We had the post-September 11 tensions, the war on terror. We had all kinds of wars and conflicts within the region. So what I look at in this book is how reality TV became a platform for the exposition and the kind of the promotion of rival points of view, political points of view, rival visions of the good society, rival ideologies. And I'll try to keep the kind of academic stuff to the minimum and tell you the story, and then in the Q&A we can do some more. So this is a cartoon from an Egyptian newspaper, September 2005. And for the non-Arabic speakers among us, the title is Types of Viewers or Kinds of Viewers. And the person to the right, the guy who's crying, is watching a newscast. And he's crying because there's really no good news to be had from the newscast. The person in the middle is watching music videos or video clips, and he's salivating at all the very sexually appealing material that he's seeing. By the way, my new project is about music videos. And the third viewer is watching reality TV show. He needs a shave. There's a spider web to denote the notion that this is people spent hours and hours and hours watching these shows. I interviewed people who were literally on a Saturday or on a Sunday, and sometimes even in the middle of the week in the summer, kids would be on the floor, on the carpet, watching the stuff for 10 hours at a time. And I'll explain how that works. So obviously that triggered a lot of reactions. And one of the things I do in the book is I try to look at how Arab intellectuals and journalists reacted to this, but also how television personalities reacted to this. And I will start with a quote from the very popular show on Algeria, Bila Hudud, hosted by Ahmed Mansour. This is a quote from the 3rd of March 2004. Listen to what he says. This is my translation, so if there's any mistake, blame me. He says the following: Though the West has made great strides in many fields, including human rights, Arabs have specialized in mimicking the worst the West has to offer. As soon as there's a strange or deviant fad in food, drink, fashion, triviality, and folly, Arabs rush madly upon it, imitating it blindly and ignorantly. The most prominent symptom of this imitation is the proliferation of television programs copied from European television and based on degeneration, nudity, gyrating, triviality, voyeurism, the end of privacy, and the dissemination of Western social ills under the heading of reality TV. This kind of program has infested Arab television as channels compete to acquire formats, copy them for Arab youth, and mobilize millions of viewers to follow among the participants who does what and who says what, thus toppling and destroying the values, culture, civilization, and identity of Arab society. No less of a general indictment. So this is really representative of one of the views about this phenomenon. So my question, I showed up in Lebanon the year before I came to the center. And I was going to be in Lebanon for a couple of weeks, and then I was going to go to Dubai for a month, and then to Saudi Arabia afterwards to do research about how entertainment television becomes politicized. And I had been in Lebanon for a few days, and we're walking to, my brother was as a pianist, and he was giving a concert. So we're in the coastal city of Byblos. We're walking to the church where he was going to play the piano, and my son, who was a toddler, jumped on the street. He was barely, he was 2 years old or 2.5. And there was some traffic, so I ran after him to pull him back to safety, and I screamed his name, which is Bruno. So the minute I said Bruno, we were mobbed by a bunch of young people. To cut the long story short, it turns out Bruno was one of the main participants in Star Academy 1 in the first edition. He was a Lebanese guy. And everybody, especially the young girls, were crazy about him. He wasn't a very good performer. He got kicked out very quickly. But the bottom line is I immediately discovered that these kinds of shows were watched by everybody. My grandma, who's in her 80s, early 80s, knew about it, and she's watched excerpts from it. Teenagers were crazy about it. Adults, my parents knew about it. So it was one of these, what social scientists call a total social fact. It's one of these shows that everybody watches. One of these shows that empties the streets on a Friday evening, right? And so I decided to follow through and find out what's going on. So the first show that was controversial was a show called Al-Rais, which was produced by NBC, which is Saudi-owned, Dubai-based, but it was shot in Bahrain because a media committee, a Saudi media committee composed of representatives from various ministries, refused to allow it to be shot in Saudi Arabia. And as some of you might know, Saudis go to Bahrain during the weekend for fun because it's a much more permissive atmosphere. And so the show was shot in Bahrain. It was shut down after 7 days. The day it was shut down, I called my best friend to wish him happy birthday. He was executive producer on the show. And on his birthday is the day when it was shut down, in February of that year. And I could hear screaming and shouting. I said, hey, what's going on? He said, we're shutting down. There are demonstrators. The demonstrators were not as many as Western press reports mentioned. I saw reports of thousands of demonstrators. They were really 100, maximum 200, and I'll show you some pictures. But what interested me more, rather than the shutdown, was what happened later that week in the Bahraini Majlis. What happened was a debate about whether shutting down the show was good or bad for Bahrain's national reputation. On the one hand, you had the Bahraini Majlis has 3 Islamist formations, right? And they, I'm not going to go into the details. The details give you an incentive to check out the book. The details are in the book. But all of them agreed that this show was bad for Bahrain's national reputation because, in their argument, it violated what they thought of as Islamic principles and values. On the other hand, though, there's a group in the Bahraini parliament that's called the Economist Group, which are a liberal in the European sense, economically liberal group, who argued that shutting down the show was bad for Bahrain's national reputation because it sent a signal that the country was not ready for business, was not ready for foreign investment, and because the show brought about 500 jobs to Bahrain. So we have this clash of multiple sources of making public claims, right? On the one hand, it's neoliberal economics. On the other hand, it's Islamic values very vaguely defined. And this was symptomatic of what the reality TV controversies one by one did, which is that they forced people to elaborate public arguments that they made in public as to why this is good or this is bad, bringing to the fore various sources of legitimation, various sources of these arguments, which social scientists would tell you is very typical of modernity, right? So it's not only religion or it's not only tradition that is the source for arguing what's good or what's bad, what should be permitted and what should be banned, but rather there are multiple sources. So this was case number 1. These are some of the demonstrations. Obviously, not perfect English, but the fact that there are signs in English means that the audience for these demonstrations is not just local people. This was, not a humongous demonstration about Big Brother. The biggest thing was in Saudi Arabia. Before the controversy moved to Saudi Arabia, then Kuwait and Algeria, what interested me was the hundreds of columns and op-eds and letters to the editors that used the controversy to make social or political points. There were people who made all kinds of arguments, political arguments about international politics through the prism of reality TV, especially the show Star Academy. Now, Star Academy is, for those of you who have a vague idea about reality TV, I had to watch much more than I cared to watch, frankly, for this book. But basically, it's a bunch of it's American Idol mixed with Big Brother. It's people who live together for 4 months in one house, and who take lessons in the performing arts every day. And on Friday night, they have a big show, and viewers vote somebody out until a winner is proclaimed. Now, listen to what one Syrian journalist who writes for Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Al-Quds Al-Arabi is a very Arabist, pan-Arab newspaper based in London. Listen to what he says. His name is Hakam al-Baba. He has an incredible sense of humor. His stuff is really funny, whether you agreed with him or not. He published a column in 2004 called "The Camera Rules the World, Star Academy for Arab Leaders." Listen to what he says. Quote, "The Arab viewer only needs to zap between official Arab television channels to discover that his leaders' actions, speeches, and reforms cater to television's lights and cameras and not to their people's interests and aspiration. Since ours is a tailor-made for television situation of the reality TV type, like the one we see in Star Academy, the Arab viewers follows Arab politics with the interest of those reality TV viewers, rather than with the interest warranted by existential reality. And since Arab leaders view their own view of their televised performance is similar to the viewer's vision of it," and he says, "notice here the exceptional confluence of Arab peoples and leaders. These leaders present their positions, statements, and actions as artistic performances, not as political stances. As a result," and here he's going after the Saudis, the Egyptian, the Jordanian leaders, the so-called Arab moderates close to the US. Listen to what he says about them. He said, "As a result, each one of them, His Majesty, His Excellence, or His Highness, chooses a role with which he will present himself to America. The enthusiastic rebel role, the clownish comedic role, the wise elder role, or the silent sidekick role." So he's mocking the Arab leaders. And then he argues that just like Star Academy contestants are manipulated by the producers of the show, because producers manipulate contestants to create dramatic scenes and all that, he said their common objective is to please the American producer of this political Star Academy so that they can go on playing acts for their peoples. The television camera today is the most important and effective Arab parliament. So he uses Star Academy to make a political point, which is that what he says, and he even criticized Hafiz al-Assad, his own, the leader of his own, Bashar al-Assad, of his own country, to score political points. So basically he says these Arab leaders who are dependent on the US are basically like contestants in Star Academy who are dependent on the goodwill of the producer to tell them what to do. This is another example. Now, this is one obviously political view. There's another one that came to the fore in Saudi Arabia. So in Saudi Arabia, the show was so controversial that, first of all, it elicited a dedicated fatwa from the higher council, the highest council of ulama. The only other show who had done that in the past is Tash Matash, the Saudi satire show. And the fatwa takes, systematic, criticizes everything about the show, its content. The financiers of the show, one of them is Al-Walid bin Talal, who's one of the most important investors in Saudi Arabia. There were cassette tapes. Let me show you the cover of the tape here. This cassette tape, called Akademiyat Shaitan, or Satan Academy, was taped by a preacher called Muhammad Saleh al-Munajjid. It's about 40 minutes long, and it was okayed by the Ministry of the Interior. It had a sticker from the Ministry of Interior. And frankly, it's the most intelligent, systematic engagement and criticism of the reality TV genre that I've seen anywhere. And there are about 50 books written about reality TV in the West. The guy is brilliant. And what he does, he says, these shows are very dangerous because they're live. Therefore, you never know what comes next. And because you don't know what comes next, you follow them with a kind of passion and attention that's unrelenting. So you always want to do what comes next. And it creates a social script for going off the script, so to speak, for doing something that political norms and social rules tell you not to do. Because it's live and unpredictable, it opens up that arena. It's an incredible, it's available online. For those of you who are interested, send me an email. I can give you the link. But what's more important, these are Saudi fans. This is from Al-Riyadh, the newspaper, the capital's newspaper. These are Saudi fans in the studio of Star Academy in Lebanon, north of Beirut. I don't think it's typical for the Saudi flag to be worn as a bandana on the head. It's a performance of Saudi national identity that went beyond the officially sanctioned performances of Saudi national identity. And this is an important aspect of it too. But listen to what one of the a woman journalist from Saudi Arabia talked about it. Badriya al-Bashir, who used to write for Asharq al-Awsat, now she writes for Al-Hayat. She's a quote-unquote liberal Saudi. There's a culture war going on in Saudi Arabia between conservatives, liberal, and radicals. She's one of the liberals. And she says the following. She says, Arabs shied away from voting because of fraud until satellite television and Star Academy corrupted us by inciting us to vote. Vote. You are the referee. Nominate your favorite contestant. Nominate your favorite candidate. Who do you support? Do you think he should win? Do you think she should be voted? The Arab viewer has become obsessed with voting, chiefly because voting results resemble election results in the United States. And unlike Arab elections, nobody wins by 99.99%, but rather by logical proportions, right? So, again, she uses this to make a political argument about Arab politics, that she couldn't publish a column and saying, you know, Arab dictators cheat when they have, you know, it would be unpermissible. But in the context of popular culture, she could make these same points. So this is how reality TV becomes an idiom of contention. It allows journalists, very much like the fables of La Fontaine, you know, in France. You couldn't criticize the king directly, but you could write them into the fables, and it would be okay, because it's indirect. Let me show you a clip here, since I have it. Let me see. This is a clip from one of the Star Academy performances. And those of you who follow Saudi affairs know that, oh, thank you so much, know that Valentine's Day is forbidden in Saudi Arabia, and there's a controversy every year with Valentine's Day. So this is one of the clips, just so you get a sense of. Excuse both the quality of the picture and the quality of the singing. This is on a February 12th, so 2 days before Valentine's Day. So you could imagine how this goes down in Saudi Arabia. Not among the population, mind you, because the population followed 80% of Saudis watch this on a Friday night and nothing else out of hundreds of channels available, right? So I don't have the time to show it all, unfortunately, but it's all on YouTube. So let's see, exit it. So similar things happen in Kuwait. In Kuwait, what was so interesting to me, I was in Kuwait in the middle of two events. One of them was Superstar. There was a woman who had an events management company who decided to bring the winners of Superstar, which is another reality show, to Kuwait. And it got involved into the struggle for women's political rights in Kuwait, which has been a struggle since Kuwaiti independence. For those of you who follow Kuwait, it was fascinating. I was there in the middle of it. I interviewed her. She ran for parliament after the emir, by decree, enabled women to stand for political office, but she lost. That was the first time. This time, you know, that several women got into the Majlis. But what was incredible, the fight, is, again, Star Academy was used over and over again to score political points, especially between a group of Kuwaiti feminists and the Islamist coalition in the Kuwaiti Majlis led by MP At-Tabtabai. It was really a big battle over women's political rights, and it was waged in the language of reality TV, giving examples from reality TV. So I won't spend too much time on it now. In Algeria, at first, Algerian TV, Algerian state TV, was relaying Star Academy, so it was broadcasting it. Islamists in the parliament were very angry. Bouteflika, because he wanted their support on some other issues, took it off the air. What they did, they created an Algerian version of it the first year. The second year, the Algerian version became even more conservative. By the third year, it was taken off the show, and there was a Quranic recitation show, reality TV style, in the same time slot. And this shows you, it goes from the adaptation of a Western format to a variety of hybrid forms, to then becoming completely localized, completely resonant with, I don't want to say local values, because I don't want to say that everybody in Algeria agrees with the Islamists, but at least sanctioned local values, right? And this is one of the major points of the book, which is that all these controversies serve to kind of elaborate what it means to be Arab and modern at the same time. And that doesn't mean being westernized, but that means mixing a variety of things from the West with local sources of tradition and norms. These are the finalists, the 8 finalists from Star Academy 1, just to give you a sense. And I'm going to show, this is a story that's truly fascinating, and I'm going to end with this. Superstar was done by Future TV in Lebanon. Future TV is owned by the Hariri family. And Superstar won. And in the finale, there were a Jordanian, a Lebanese, and a Syrian in the finale. And the semifinal, sorry. And the Syrian won. And there were riots in Beirut. 30 million people watched the finale, and 4.8 million voted, which led some people to quip that this is the largest Arab election in history in Arab newspapers. The Jordanian ended up winning, but what happened, a lot of people from Lebanon got very angry because they would text message their vote to vote for the Lebanese guy. They would get an SMS back saying, thank you for voting for the Syrian contestant. And of course, at that time, you know, the Syrian intelligence ran everything in Lebanon. So people assumed that this was why it happened that way. Superstar 2 in 2004, there was Ammar, who was from the West Bank town of Salfit, who was doing really well, a Palestinian kid. Hamas published several statements against him. The Islamic Action Front in Jordan, which is the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood, also published several things against him. Gaddafi supported personally the Libyan candidate, who ended up winning. Gaddafi met him at the airport when he came back, which he rarely does to heads of states. The most interesting, though, is Superstar 3, because it happened 2006, right after Hariri was assassinated in 2004. You've all heard about the Independence Intifada / Cedar Revolution. What we had in the finale there, these are the hosts of Superstar, was a Saudi man, Brahim al-Hikmi, against a 17-year-old Syrian woman who had spent the last 3 weeks before the show, before the finale, saying, forget that I'm Syrian. Don't vote for me because I'm Syrian. Look at how I sing. Look at my stage presence. I'm an artist. I'm not an ambassador for my country. Why? Because, you know, she was competing against a Saudi, and Saudis vote in millions in these shows, number one. She was competing in Lebanon at a time where anti-Syrian sentiment was at an absolute high in Lebanon. And on the stage of the channel owned by Rafiq al-Hariri, when the Lebanese political class, for the most part, was accusing Syria of assassinating. So the odds were really stacked against her, right? Look at what happens. She starts singing. After spending 2 weeks saying, forget it, I'm Syrian, disassociating himself from Syrian identity, look what happens to her. It's going to happen very quickly, so. Shahad Barmada from Syria. Look. So she spends weeks saying, forget that I'm Syrian. The minute she starts singing, she has an incredible voice, right? She's very, very good. Her father jumps on stage. He's sitting in the front row, wraps her with a body-sized Syrian flag. Look at what she does. You know, there's a moment of unease, and then obviously she cannot put her flag on the floor, right? What does she do? She puts it on one shoulder. It's less visible, right? So it's an example. One of the things that is central to the book is how important gender became in these kind of national fights over national identities, in this case between Lebanon and Syria. And it's always women who got caught in the middle. And of course we know, historians and social scientists know that women play a very tragic figure in nationalism because, you know, we have Marianne in France, we have Boadicea in Britain. They become symbols of national identities. So she lost because of this. And there was another case, Shada Hassoun, the Iraqi. I'm going to go. This is Star Academy after Hariri was killed. They stopped for 1 week, and then they came back in what is called the Patriotic Night. They're all dressed in black, Lebanese flags all over the place. Websites about nominating reviled politicians to be kicked out. And look at this sign. This was from the demonstrations in Beirut, from the March 14, 2005 demonstration. It says, Lahoud nominee called 1559. Lahoud was the president of Lebanon, known to be very close to the Syrians. He was nominated to be kicked out of the show of Lebanon. And typically you give a 4-digit phone number or text messaging number. 1559 is United Nations Security Council Resolution 1559 that France and the US co-sponsored to get the Syrians out of Lebanon. Right? So here again, the language of reality TV is used to convey a very powerful political message. And there are many other examples. This is the Iraqi who won, again, national flags immediately. These kids can't help it, right? They start singing as their own nice individuals, within a couple of weeks, they become representatives of their countries. Whether they like it or not, they can do it. So, again, she now released a music video where she's singing against the American occupation in terms of language, but the visuals show her falling in love with an American soldier. So again, she's at the center of a huge debate now as we speak. This morning there were several internet postings against her. What I want to end up with is examples of reality shows that were not controversial because they were seen to be resonant with what people consider to be local values. Green Light by Dubai TV was a show where people did charitable deeds, the Islamic way. There were 2 poetry shows, which I spent quite a bit of time discussing at the conclusion of the book. Poetry is a very important cultural form in the Arab world. It's a political idiom. It's an art form. When big poets die, they get national funerals. They don't get it anywhere else. So there's something very important about poetry. These are poetry shows where poets compete and are voted out by the audience until somebody wins. And if you read the newspapers last week, there was a Saudi woman who challenged the clerics, what she called the clerics of hate in Saudi Arabia, by appearing on one of these shows. So they are very political. And then there's Kafilat al-Quran. I mentioned it in Algeria, Quranic recitations. And Stars of Science, which Qatar TV did last year. Kids invented stuff. They really invented, small inventions. But it's basically adopting this format to socially desirable kinds of things. So there are transformative narratives of social and political change. It's also a catalyst for debating sensitive topics. And finally, reality TV, the controversies, when people argue over these shows, it serves as a public platform for the selective adoption of Western culture. So I'll stop there, and I hope I didn't speak too long.
Thank you very much, Marwan. We'll now open the floor to question. Marwan, did they react so vehemently to that Al-Rais show? Is it because of the name of the show also, which reminded people of Nasser, and or was it the content, or what?
Well, it was several things. I spent 3 weeks in Dubai with the people who work on the show. They were working on another show. It was a combination. The name definitely struck a chord.
Yeah.
Al-Rais, it symbolizes Nasser, but it also, it's Al-Rais. It's the president of any country. That's the way people are referred to. It's also the fact that some people in Bahrain were fed up by the Saudis using Bahrain as a dumping ground for stuff they don't want to happen in Saudi Arabia. And it was also a lot of money was at stake, and apparently there were some issues between the producers of the show. I interviewed about 10 people who worked on it, and everybody had these non-disclosure agreements that were apparently ironclad, but they still said a few things that led me to think that it was very political, but there was something more. There was a business dispute also.
But let me follow up. What sort of dumping is it if you have millions of Saudis watching it and voting for it?
Well, there were columns, and I cite a couple of them in the book, about Manama, the Bahraini capital, being the party grounds, basically the spring break destination of Saudi men on weekends. And I think some Bahrainis take issue with that. That why do they come and do these socially undesirable things, sex, alcohol, all that stuff? Why don't they do it at home?
Roxana, just wait for the mic, please. It's come. Thank you.
Roxana Bahramitash, thank you very much. It was very interesting. I was in Dubai. I saw some of this. I was very interested in how in Algeria they indigenized it, because it's just, it seems that it is.
They indigenized it step by step. So first there was Star Academy. Basically the elephant in the room is that all of these shows, the most controversial ones, were either made in Lebanon or were made by Lebanese. The other side of this coin is that they were all financed by Saudi money, right? So chapter 2 of the book is called The Saudi-Lebanese Connection, which traces its history to the beginning of the 20th century, Lebanese journalists working, for Saudi princes, all that stuff. But, so it started as the Lebanese Star Academy, then it became a local version of Star Academy, then it became kind of a version of the same show that was more conservative, both in styles of dress and in the kinds of singing. So there were lots of anashid as opposed to pop. And then it moved to being just straightforward Quranic recitation. And so you have your chants and you recite verses, and the jury votes, whether you're good or not, and then viewers decide whether you stay on the show or not. So it's a complete, it's a transformation of this genre for prayer, basically.
Could you please wait for the mic? Just thank you.
And what kind of viewership does it have in Algeria? Because I served there up until a few years ago, and at least when I was there from 2003 to 2006 as ambassador, the great majority of people were watching French television.
Yes, thank you. This is a very good point, and I'll tell you why it was popular in Saudi Arabia. The way LBC in Lebanon got it is because the French version, which was on TF1, was broadcast throughout French-speaking North Africa and the Levant. That's how it started being popular, right? So the Algerians and the Tunisians and the Moroccans knew of the French version and were very excited when they finally got the chance to see their own participating in these shows. Now, having said this, I know from the volume of blogs and posting online and cell phone traffic when anybody from North Africa was on these shows, that there was quite a bit of interest. But unfortunately, this is a kind of a bit of a bad story about audience research in the Arab world. Until very recently, the Maghreb didn't count, right? Because people were really after the Gulf market. So you didn't have good audience research in Algeria to know exactly how popular it was. It's beginning to change now, because now a lot of channels are creating kind of Maghreb channels. You would just do North Africa, the 3 countries, basically. I know it was very popular, but I don't have hardcore evidence to offer to support that.
Okay. Yes, please. The mic here.
It's Bob Miller. I head the Islamic Development Initiative in North America. Is there any distinction in the Arab world in media matters between copying something that takes place in North America, and I include Canada in that, versus Western Europe? Or do they...
Not really. Not really, no. Because when you talk about the concerns about, the cultural conquest and Western invasion and all that, they really are about the United States, right? Why? Because the U.S. is such a powerful presence. Anything that happens in the U.S. is local news in the Arab world. And so metaphorically, when they speak about Westernization, it's really the U.S. You know what? The ironic thing is that these formats are European formats. Right? All these shows, they're either English, Dutch, or French. There are 3 format companies. What they do is they create very much like the franchising system. So McDonald's, you own the name and you sell franchises. That's how the format industry works. So they were developed in Europe, but the debates in the Arab world, they were usually about the West as a general category. When it became more specific, it was nearly always about the U.S. It's complete. The U.S. and Westernization are completely conflated.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Marwan. Theo Dolan from the U.S. Institute of Peace. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Can you talk about the nationalist element that you brought up in a different context? For example, the case of Shada Hassoun.
Yes.
She was an amazing unifying figure for Iraq. Or although the use of the flag might have been seen in a negative light regionally, can you talk about how that was a unifying element in a more localized context?
Absolutely, and I discuss this in the book, and I'm writing now about Shada, about this new music video, because now music video is emerging as the form of, how different ideologies wage war with each other in the Arab world. Shada Hassoun was 26 years old when she won Star Academy 4 in the spring of 2007. So she was much older than anyone else who had won. And I know from several people who worked on the show, without attribution, that the organizers, the producers, were not interested in her winning. They were pushing a Tunisian woman precisely because they wanted to tap the North African market. But this is what happened. She decided to sing the famous song Baghdad as her first solo in Star Academy. When she said, and it's on YouTube, by the way. I can't show you everything, right? But you can find it. She did an incredible job at a time when the news was, 50 people died today, suicide bombing there, you know, war in Fallujah, all that stuff. And that struck a chord. What happens, as soon as she started rising, she became a big subject of contention among Iraqis because she just acquired Iraqi nationality recently. She ran as an Iraqi. Her nationality is Moroccan. She grew up in Morocco, studied in Lebanon. Her mother was Moroccan, her dad was Iraqi, right? But in Iraqi exile. She claimed the Iraqi mantle. I don't know if it's because it was a very savvy kind of showbiz move, but when she won, so basically the producer did not want her to win, but she started getting all these numbers. They were amazed. There was a fight. There were statements that from the Shia that she's Shia, from the Sunnis that she's Sunni. The Kurds claimed her as, oh no, you know, her father is of Kurdish origin. I mean, it's really funny. You look at these blogs and the insurgency. Some people from the insurgency posted, there were 3 or 4 posts against her, saying she gives the wrong idea of what the ideal Iraqi woman is. But they all voted for her, right? So this is what's so interesting. She got 7 million votes from Iraq at a time when most Iraqis did not have electrical power. Many of them could not afford, you know, the SMS stuff. The cell networks were in shambles. We're talking 2004. It was a lot worse than it is today. She got 7 million votes from within Iraq, right? Which tells you how, especially women, you know, women singing patriotic songs become magnets for national identity and feelings of patriotism. And she did. Then she became, she started doing public service announcements for Al-Iraqiyya against violence. She committed herself to doing stuff for Iraq. And now she made this mistake with this music video, and she's saying basically, the music video is called Wa'ad Arqub, right? Arqub is this legendary person who never fulfills his promises. And she basically accuses the US of not having fulfilled its promise to make Iraq a democratic, peaceful, and prosperous place. So she's, that's it, she can't pretend she's not political anymore. And she's the one figure that seemed to galvanize all Iraqis around their national identity. A fascinating figure, really.
Yes, please. Are you okay?
Hi. I'm very curious about these poetry shows, The Millionaire Poet and Prince of Poets. I'm wondering how severely this content of the poetry is censored, and maybe what the content of the poetry is, and if this form of art is still attractive to young Arabs today.
Okay, so let me give you a background about the 2 shows. One of them focuses on Gulf poetry. The other is Arab poetry at large. Poetry in general is still extremely popular in the Arab world. You still have young Arabs who want to be poets and who say, I'm a poet, who are in the orbit of established poets. Poetry is still accorded a huge importance. At every channel in the Arab world, there are around 500 satellite channels, at some point had a poetry show. A weekly show, 1 hour or 2 hours, where the host welcomes poets, talks about, you know, they read some poetry. So it's still, it's much more vibrant and important for the public as an art form, I would argue, than anywhere else in the world. Certainly more than in the US and Europe, right? That's one. The 2 shows were made by Abu Dhabi TV, and they were financed by the Abu Dhabi Cultural Authority. So the state, the emirate of Abu Dhabi, had a say in them, right? Because what they do, the argument is, these are shows that are done in a format that is popular with young and old people, but that brings back the canon of Arabic poetry. What's wrong with that? It's the best of both worlds. And when you add huge cash prizes, when the first couple of editions were criticized for not bringing in enough women, but then you have the Saudi women, Hissa, I forgot her name, 10 days ago, that said, I mean, I don't think there's any censorship, because some of the stuff that's been said on these shows, I mean, we're talking a frontal attack on the Saudi clerical establishment by a 22-year-old Saudi woman whose face we couldn't see because she was wearing the niqab, right? And she wasn't censored. In fact, she got pushed to the final. You know, if there was any censorship, she would have been out. Let me tell you. I mean, I know how these shows work. I know how political pressure works on the media in the region. If there was any censorship, she would have been out. You know, unless some powerful figures in Saudi Arabia have a vested interest now in criticizing the clerics. And there is a battle going on. There's a battle going on at the highest levels of government in Saudi Arabia. And that was an expression of it. But the fact that it's through the medium of poetry makes it more acceptable and more resonant in the region, I think, especially in the Gulf.
Marwan, you mentioned ideological war. What does this mean?
What this means, for the last year, I've been observing music videos which are connected to reality TV in so many ways. Those are 3 to 5 minutes songs with pictures that in the Arab world, unlike in the West, they play on all channels, except Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya don't play them, but every once in a while they might within some shows. But all the other general channels like LBC, like NBC, they play some video clips before the news, between programs, late at night, so they're fillers. They're also available online, so they're ubiquitous. And therefore, if you have an idea that you care about, you put it in music video form. So for instance, after the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, there were several songs that political agendas were encapsulated in these songs. So there was one, Julia Butros did this song called Ahabai. She raised $1.5 million for the population of the South, whose houses got destroyed, without any direct criticism of Israel. There were some people who had much more straightforward political messages. There are some that are religious. So there's a new genre called the Islamist music video. Sami Yusuf, who lives in London, he's from Azerbaijan, or his parents are from Azerbaijan. He puts religious messages in the form of music videos because he believes that in that form, young people will listen to him. But they won't listen to a stern, kind of preachy type of religious figure. So it's basically all kinds of ideological, religious, political messages being encapsulated or framed in this kind of pop, appealing, slick, innocent-looking form.
David?
Dave Ottaway, senior scholar here. I'm just curious what role Egyptians are playing in the transformation of what you're talking about here.
I have a chapter, not in this book, in the other book, in the Arab television industry, why Egypt was not a major player in this. Because in Egypt, the hand of the government is still extremely powerful in deciding media affairs. So that the country that in the era of national broadcasting, right, when governments controlled national television, had the most vibrant, the most powerful media industry, in the satellite era struggles to keep up. Because Egyptian television channels, there are many of them, most of them are owned by the government, the satellite channels, are focused inwards, or are focused on Egyptians living in the Gulf, especially, migrant workers. And so in anything that is more dynamic, kind of business-oriented, Egypt has not played a very important role. In reality TV, there hasn't been a single show of any significance on Egyptian TV. They stayed out of that game for a variety of reasons, but mostly because it's government owned. All these shows are made by private broadcasters. That's one. Two, I think there's another very important issue about Egypt, which is that what they're realizing now, that if you allow private sector companies to develop these skills, you will lose not only in reality TV and variety shows where you never had a presence, but in the bastions that you controlled in the past, such as television drama. So what happens now, the Egyptians are competing with Syrian drama, which has become in many ways much more appealing than Egyptian drama for Gulf buyers, right? And so they're having issues, and they're reconsidering what they're doing and what they're doing wrong. But it's not a major player in this.
Marwan, one last question. What I don't understand is that if the Maghreb was not so important for this, then why did the Algerian have to step by step modify it and end up with a Quranic reality TV?
Because it was, I think because popular culture becomes a political currency, right? So the president says, okay, I'll cancel this if you give me that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that for young people, these were very popular. And state broadcasters are suffering a long-term process of bleeding. They're bleeding viewers. So that a lot of state broadcasters now, the newscast gets 2-3% of the national viewership. Mm-hmm. Like, they're doing less well than PBS does in this country. right? And PBS does not do very well in the States, right? And so they're afraid of losing more and more young viewers, so they figured at least if we keep the format, maybe we can keep some of them. That's what some of them have told me, at least.
Thank you very much, Marwan, for accepting to come despite your backache and give us this wonderful talk. And there are copies of the book outside for you to pick up, and Marwan has graciously accepted to sign the book. Thank you for coming.